Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
So last week we spoke on Shavuot about what it means to make a choice to be a Jew, right? We talked about it both from a perspective of those people who were not born Jewish and have made a choice to be Jewish. And we've talked about it also in terms of those people who were born Jewish and still need to make a choice to be Jewish. And this week I want to speak about a very particular category of choices and think about what it means for us today. In Parasha Nasso, we read about the Nazir. Now, for those who have been doing Daf Yomi, we spent an entire tractate in recent months talking about the Nazir. But I want to look at it today. I want to try to understand what it meant to be a Nazir in ancient times, and if there are any things today, in today's day and age, that actually connect us with this idea of Nazir. So let's turn to chapter 6, Numbers chapter 6, page 799. This is how it's introduced at the beginning of chapter 6. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, if anyone, man or woman, explicitly utters a Nazirite's vow to set himself apart for the Lord, he shall abstain from wine and any other intoxicant. He shall not drink vinegar of wine or any other intoxicant, neither shall he drink anything in which grapes have been steeped, nor even eat grapes fresh or dried, throughout the entire term of the Nazirite." It later on, it continues on. It's actually a fairly long section, if you think about it in our Torah. On verse 5, "No razor shall touch his head, it shall remain consecrated. You shall keep themselves separate from a dead body." There's all of these rules that a Nazirite has to follow. The first question is, according to this, how do you become a Nazir? How do you become a Nazir? You make a vow. You make a vow. Now, with a notable exception within our tradition, who makes that vow? Well, I'm talking about the non-exception. Who makes the vow? The person who's becoming a Nazir, right? The notable exception is that of Shimshon, of Samson, where his mother makes the vow, right? But normally, this is you, yourself, a person, is making a vow to be a Nazir. So the question is, why? Right? The Torah doesn't really say why somebody would make this vow. There's some implications here, but why? Why would somebody decide to say, all right, I'm not going to have any alcohol, I'm not going to have any strong drinks, I'm not going to shave my head, I'm not going to come close to dead? Like all of these extra rules, right? By the way, there are enough rules for us in this Torah, 613 of them. Why would somebody impose upon themselves extra ones? What do you think? The rabbis definitely make that connection between the sotah of a woman who goes astray, and now this is sort of man or woman, although typically it tends to be men, alcohol and what alcohol can do to us. That is true. That is true. I like this idea of the rabbis talk a little bit about it also, this sense of haughtiness. that maybe we want to bring ourselves down a little bit? Bruce?
Possibly kind of make a deal. You get through a very big trial. You say, I'll become a Nazarene for this.
Right.
Or maybe a big guilt trip. You did something really wrong, and you say, okay, I've got to get over this.
So maybe Bruce is saying, right, you've gone through a hard time in your life, and maybe in the midst of it, you'll say, oh, if you do this, there's a great MASH episode. You all know I love MASH, right? There's a great MASH episode where somebody's really struggling, and Father Mulcahy sits down with him, and Father Mulcahy says, what's wrong? And he says, well, I was in the middle of this foxhole, in the middle of this firefight, and I said, God, if you get me out of this, I'll become a priest. And Father Mulcahy says, and God got you out of it. And he says, and I don't want to be a priest, right? And so, we say things in time of trial and trouble. Maybe that's what it is. Tom?
I'm also thinking that if you add another self-imposed layer of rules, in a way you're creating a little buffer to the other 613 mitzvot so that there's less chance that you will not follow them. So
Good. So we have in our tradition a siyag la Torah, a fence around the Torah, this buffer that we create for ourselves to make sure that we don't transgress any of these important 613 commandments. And Tom is arguing maybe this is a way to create a little bit more of that buffer to make sure that you're being extra careful and we don't transgress.
I'm thinking of Thai Buddhism, where in Thailand, people become priests. They do it, army officers do it, cabinet ministers do it. And it's a way, it's an opportunity to become more saintly for a period of time, maybe a year, whatever. How many opportunities in life do we have to elevate ourselves beyond the ordinary? So
Beautiful.
opportunity to do something special and feel that you're consecrating yourself to God.
Beautiful, Milt. So in other traditions as well, there's the opportunity to become a priest, to sort of elevate your religious status for a period of time. For a period of time. This isn't the rest of your life, although some people choose to do that, right? But this is for a period of time to say, okay, I'm going to take a year, 6 months, whatever it may be. And by the way, the vow of the Nazir, and the rabbis in the Talmud have a long discussion about this. The rabbis understand this as a finite, limited vow. They actually look down very, very strongly on somebody who makes a vow of Nazirut for life. That is not seen as something that you want to do. If you're going to do this, they actually look down on all of this. But if you're going to do this, it's for a very finite period of time, and maybe it's to elevate, it's to get yourself out of whatever place you're in right now and change your life. Good. Yes.
I was going to say, it's interesting when you get to the end that to Bruce's point, you're required, I mean, there are a lot of steps to finish this off, including a korban chatat, which is a sin offering.
Mm-hmm.
And they really are not thrilled about the whole thing because, number one, it's like you're not able to make kiddush over wine, but really because you're separating yourself from the community and you can't, especially during times of Talmud, death was so pervasive.
Good.
People would die in a hospital or something, they die on the street, and then you might be the only one there to bury them.
Right.
And you get yourself into this sort of stuck loop.
So you said two things, Diana, that I think are really important. One is the rabbis really push back against this idea of Nazirut. By the way, the rabbis push back against the idea of vows in general, right? Vows are very complicated and very powerful within Judaism, and the rabbis really sort of say we shouldn't be making any vows. There's other ways to show that you intend to do something without making a vow, and they really try to limit to say that if you're going to make a vow, it has to be within a very particular formula, and there has to be witnesses and all these sorts of things to try and keep people from making these vows. But Nazirut, the vow of being a Nazir in particular, the rabbis really struggle with. And you said something which I want to get back to in a second, but you said something that it separates you away from the community. And I think that's a really important aspect of all of this that I want to get back to in today's context as we go. So there are a lot of different potential reasons, right, why somebody would be a Nazir. And I want to think more in today's context, right? What's the cognate? What what is something that we can say that is sort of like Nizirut? That I'm going to make a promise not to do X, Y, and Z. And first of all, what does that look like and why do we do that? Yes? Catholics do it for Lent. I'm actually thinking of taking it out of the religious world, but yes, the Catholics do it for Lent. That's also a finite period of time, and it's not everything. It's usually one thing that you're going to give up for Lent for this period of time. To elevate yourself, right? By the way, we do it too, although we've made such an amazing holiday out of it that we've sort of lost the sense of it. Like when we go out and live in a sukkah, it's the same sort of idea of saying, look, we don't need all this stuff. Let's step away from it for a little bit and focus on the things that are important. But we don't do it in an ascetic sort of sense of giving things up so much. We actually celebrate that in the sukkah. We decorate the sukkah. We look at it differently. But in the non-religious world, dry January, right? Dry January. I'm actually just thinking even a diet. Right? Right? And hopefully a diet is finite. For many of us, it isn't. But you know, this idea of, okay, I am going to restrict myself from certain things, right? I'm going to restrict myself from either A, B, or C things, you know, chocolate cake or ice cream or whatever it is, or I'm going to restrict the number of calories that I have, right? That's something that we understand in the modern world, and the question is, why do we do it, right? We don't do it because it's fun, most of us, right? We do it because there's something on the other side of it that we want to try and attain. There's a purpose to that particular thing. And I think, going back to this idea of Nizirut, there's a purpose. The question is, what is the purpose, right? Is the purpose to feel spiritually elevated? Maybe, right? Is the purpose because I feel like I'm better than everybody else and I'm going to show it by doing all of this stuff? Well, maybe. But actually, as I started looking through, there were a number of rabbis, especially in the modern age, who sort of looked back on this and seen this as almost a counter or an antidote to overindulgence. To overindulgence, right? This is the equivalent of a diet. I've eaten too much. I'm eating too much. I need to stop. I need to pull myself back. And there's this fight between our natural instincts and between our learned instincts, right? If you look out in the natural world, most animals, their natural instincts actually help them to survive, to be healthier. The way we act very often is contrary to that, right, as human beings. And that's because these are our learned behaviors, right, of that overtake our natural instincts for protection, peace, health, all those sorts of things, right, that we have as human beings, as creatures in our natural instincts. Sometimes, well, here we are living in the United States, and we know that, you know, having a dessert that is, you know, 2,000 calories isn't so good for us, but, you know, well, we're going to do it anyway, right? Because it's good, and we want to. And so there's this sense that Nizirut is a way of countering overindulgence. Somebody who feels like, I can't control it any other way, I'm going to step back. And there's actually some people who look at it as, I'm trying to give you the actual name, who look at it as almost like a 12-step program, right? I've gotten myself into trouble in some sort of way, and I need for a finite period of time to pull back, to be able to gain control of my life, allow those natural instincts to reassert themselves so that I can be healthy and do what I need to do. And these things that are weighing me down physically or spiritually, because Nizirut deals with both, right? So intoxicants, those sorts of things, that's a physical sort of thing. Coming in contact with death and dead bodies, and you're right, it was everywhere, it was prevalent. And I imagine for some people that was overwhelming. And it started to affect who they were. And maybe people needed to step away from that and to say, look, I can't deal with this right now. I need to keep myself separate from that to get myself healthy again. That may be a very powerful way to do it. A very powerful way to do it. Here it is. So Rabbi Jacob Rubenstein says that the Nazirite vow may have functioned like a 12-step program, which is to say that maybe people didn't make vows of abstinence in order to become a Nazir, but rather they may have become Nazirim in order to structure their lives for abstinence. Nizirut wasn't the goal. Nizirut is the tool. And I think as we start to look at the rabbis and how they pushed against Nizirut in the Talmud, they don't say, oh, we shouldn't have Nizirut. Well, they couldn't, it's in the Torah. But they say the Nizirut, the way that it's happening, it shouldn't, people saying, I'm going to be a Nazir the rest of my life, where Nizirut becomes the end, that's what they push against. Nizirut is a tool to gain control of our lives, to be able to say, look, I need some structure here, right? I'm a little bit out of control. I need to pull myself back. I need to make some rules for myself. I don't think anybody has a problem with that, whether it's in the physical world, whether it's in the spiritual world. What they did have a problem with, and this is what I want to get back to, and I'm going to end with this, what they did have a problem with is, by definition, a Nazir is separate from the community. And the rabbis really struggled with that piece of it. Because you can't ultimately be a Jew by yourself. It's very difficult, right? And so when you're going to say, I'm going to separate myself from the community, I'm no longer going to go to parties because I can't have wine. And I'm no longer going to look like everybody else because now I can't cut my hair, and now my hair is going to be really, really long, and it's going to separate me out that way. And I'm not going to go to funerals and those sorts of things where to support the community and to be there as part of that community because I'm a Nazir and I'm separate. I think the rabbis struggled with that aspect. So the question is, how do we conceive and utilize this tool and still see it as being part of the community? And I'll leave you with this thought. We as Jews, especially in America in the 21st century, we rail and we struggle against the 613 mitzvot, let alone adding these other ones, right? We struggle against these other mitzvot. And the question is, instead of adding new mitzvot and saying, okay, this is how I'm going to try and separate myself and get myself healthy, maybe we have the mitzvot that are already here and we can start to say, look, let me actually engage with community that will take me down a different path, utilize the mitzvot that we already have, and be able to bring some structure and control into our life, because ultimately that's what these mitzvot are for anyway. And to me, that's the last piece of why I think the rabbis pushed against Nizirut. It was an overabundance of control, and sometimes we need that. But for most of us, if we actually live our lives according to everything else that we're reading, we don't need that extra. Let's just focus on those things first, as opposed to jumping and saying, well, I don't keep Shabbat and I don't keep anything else, but now I'm going to be a Nazir. It makes no sense. Start with those things that help us to create those rhythms in our life and those patterns in our life that are healthy, and then if there are times when we as an individual need that extra help, there are those tools that we can use within our tradition as well, but those need to be used very carefully and very judiciously. Something to think about as we read Parashat Nasso. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.